Ace of Spades, welcome to Goblin-Inc. Shred is my most played League starter build for Druid. It has exceptional leveling and exceptional mid-game, with several key advantages that other builds simply do not have. Starting with the fact that it does not require any unique, and on top of that, the two key aspects for the build can be found in dungeons, which is accessible at level 1. The first one can be found in the Tormented Ruins, and it's called the Unsatiated Aspect. The Unsatiated Aspect will help you with your resource management, yet it needs crit to work. But this is not gonna be a problem for Shred, and we're gonna see that in a while. Before that, we need to talk about the Malnock Stronghold. I prepared some footage of Malnock Stronghold with a level 3 Druid, and as you can see, the dungeon is not locked behind a level 18 base level anymore. It can be done right away. And behind Malnock, you'll be able to access a dungeon called Annika's Claim. Annika's Claim provides you with a Stormclaw aspect that is all you are going to be needing for your leveling experience. And now we're gonna delve a little bit deeper into how the build functions and why it translates so well also into the mid-game and forward, and what you really need to know for the build to work. So we talked about how we're using the Unsatiated Aspect, which, as you can see, it requires you to critically strike. Most people already are guessing it, that we're gonna be using the keystone Lupine Ferocity. And while that is not really an incredible news, I want you guys to think about how in this season we're gonna be lacking the Chaos powers. If you guys remember, in the previous season, it was possible with Purge the Infected to have guaranteed critical strikes on every ability for Druid. Now, this made Shred not so unique, because your guaranteed crit every 3 strikes not that powerful anymore if everyone has guaranteed crit. But now, while every build needs to build massive amounts of critical strike chance, we don't. And that's why this build gets online really quickly. We skip the need for building critical strike chance, which is very difficult and usually requires several items with GA. But for us, the moment that we get our Lupine Ferocity online, we can start critting casually, just like that. And with the Stormclaw aspect, providing a large amount of AoE damage to surrounding enemies, and our Shred ability, which has, of course, a guaranteed leap, we really have a good experience in terms of speed, damage, AoE, resource generation, and ability to crit quite easily. Now, this build has two versions, the before Grizzly Rage version and the early endgame version. Another reason why I like Shred for the mid-game, which I would consider the first tiers of Torment, and you can even do up to Torment 4 with Shred and then later on switch into a more unique dependent build, is that we do not need any unique item for the build. Yes, I have also an endgame version of Shred, and I'm gonna link a couple of endgame builds under this YouTube video, but we have a very powerful unique that it's not best in slot for the build. When you have access to mythical items, you can run Shroud of False Death or Tyrell's Might. Madwolf Glee isn't that important, but it is a very powerful chest that bridges the gap between your super endgame gear and your mid-game gear. It is incredibly powerful, very high damage, move speed, attack speed, life, and even buffs your keystone. So it's really an ideal item that can be obtained right away when you reach the endgame and allows the build to perform incredibly well. So let's talk about the two different versions of the build. The before Grizzly Rage and the early endgame. The early endgame with Grizzly Rage, I would suggest to play this after you get to your max level and start getting your Paragon points. I have a very thin Paragon board where we rush for all the important legendary nodes. And if you want the more endgame advanced build, that is also gonna be linked in the YouTube video description, so you can get that. But this version, I would not run Grizzly Rage right away. It is best to have a little bit of gear before you run that, and my suggestion is to play the before Grizzly Rage build and really only focusing on your jewels in terms of aspects. Now I'm gonna show you one little change that I'm actually gonna do for the build. As you guys can see, optimally, the Stormclaw aspect should be on your two-handed weapon. That is correct, but because the jewels do not get changed as often, it is, in my opinion, best to put the Stormclaw aspect on the amulet and then switch the Blurred Beast aspect on the weapon. Now, if you can happen to be in town and able to add the Blurred Beast aspect, that's fine, but logically speaking, you are gonna be finding weapons on the ground and really just putting it on as you go. So logically, if you happen to be in town, yes, you can add the Blurred Beast aspect to your weapon, and it is more optimal to have the Stormclaw aspect on your weapon, but if you plan on just pushing through levels quickly, I would suggest keep your core aspect on your jewels and do not change them often. When you reach the early endgame and you start progressing through pits, trying to pass different torment levels, switch to this game. When you get to torment and you start progressing to pits, you want to switch from the before Grizzly Rage build to the Grizzly Rage build. The reason for that is, at this point in the game, with some ancestral items, you will not be changing your gear as often, and this build has several unique requirements in terms of aspects, not in terms of gear. So it requires some very specific aspects. The Rampaging Werebeast and the Rabid Bear are the two aspects that work in tandem with your skill Grizzly Rage. Without them, Grizzly Rage isn't really that powerful, and that's why you want to be switching to the Grizzly Rage build once you enter into Torment and you find your first ancestral items. Before that, I would suggest playing this version of the build with the occasional Petrify and a lot less, as you can see, a lot less monetary aspect. Really, just running through levels, in my opinion, is the best thing you can do, and don't really waste too much time wasting on upgrading your leveling gear. Start doing that after you get to the first pits. That's what I would do. We have lost all of our Chaos perks this season, so we're not going to be getting any guaranteed crit, which for us, again, is really good, as unlike other builds, we have guaranteed crit, and that's something that I really like for an early mid-game build that bypasses a lot of gear requirements, no uniques. That's really a strong point for me to wanting to play this build early. So let's dive through our skill tree and talk about it a little bit. Basic attack is not really something that you're going to be using a lot in this build, but Claw, if you need to regenerate some resources, and you can use Maul as well to switch quickly between different forms. And the reason why we're doing that is because it helps us activate Quick Shift and Heightened Senses, which provide both damage reduction, and even movement speed. In this build, we're getting Digit Great Gate for move speed. Again, we can skip Critical Strike Chance because it is guaranteed for us. Bulwark is gonna be our source of Unstoppable. I would suggest not spamming this ability and only keeping it for when you need a stun break. And of course, Blood Howl is something that recovers its cooldown on kills, so it's very easy for us to upkeep this as much as possible. There is really not too much important to talk about in the talents, other than, of course, having 5 points in Grizzly Rage is going to be very important, because after the PTR, Grizzly Rage has been buffed one more time, and it will have an extra 10 cooldown reduction at level 5. So it is important for this to be level 5. Other than that, there's really not much that is important. But what is more important is the Paragon board. What I really think is key is to reach Lust for Carnage right away. And that's because this helps us generate more spirit. And the more spirit you have, the more free you are to spam your abilities and move quickly. So in this Paragon board, we are running through our board reaching for the legendary nodes. Now that nodes and also glyphs have been nerfed, and especially when your glyph is low level, it is better to simply dash through the Paragon board and get to your very powerful legendary nodes, which have been buffed pretty heavily in the past few seasons. And that's why you can see this type of Paragon board that in the early game you just rush for your as many legendary nodes as you can. Unfortunately, for Shred, we actually do not have 5 legendary nodes. That's a big mistake and a big oversight from Blizzard, and it's very weird that they have not fixed that. But other than that, the build is very well made, in my opinion, and very fun to play. We can quickly talk about our spirit boons, which can be changed depending on our needs. So the one that is really important, in my opinion, is Gift of the Stag. Now, Gift of the Stag is only really useful if you have spirit issues. If you find yourself not having any issues with spirit, you can change from Spirit of the Stag to damage reduction or even prickle skin for some extra damage. Eagle is also very flexible in what it can do. You can either get 20% attack speed, which if you have low attack speed, it will be close to 20% damage. But if you want to be tankier, which in the early game, it's kind of a bottleneck for your pits, then I would suggest Iron Feather, and of course Ivian Wrath being a 40% critical strike damage multiplier is mandatory. We are running Calamity to extend the Grizzly Rage duration, and we are running Masochist for that nicens with extra healing. The reason why we do not need to run Overload is because we do not need to poison enemies to activate some of our buffs like Toxic Claws, etc., because we are doing poison damage thanks to the aspect of the Rabbit Bear, which turns all of our damage into poison damage. If you are afraid that Grizzly Rage isn't as good anymore, it has been buffed after PTR, because it was nerfed from the previous season during PTR, but Grizzly Rage is now buffed again, and uptime should be almost 100% without too much problems. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys on my endgame guides.